Hey, welcome to Dallas Fort Worth. We're here for the second day of the calling. I'm Tannen Grace. That's DM Armada, and we are ready to crown a champion here today, but we've got about 6 rounds of action before we do that. What are the guys playing with today?
We are playing in the draft format. In fact, they have just concluded the draft and are into round one, getting set up and ready to go. We're playing the draft format. If you don't know, the draft format is a very simple format. Everybody is going to sit down at a table, 8 to a pod, and they're going to crack open 1 pack out of 3. They're going to look at the cards in their pack. They're going to take one, select it, put it face down in front of them, and pass that pack generally to your left. You generally pass to your left first. This sort of wheels around and continues, everyone taking one, making a stack of cards they've selected until all the cards are gone. Then they'll open pack 2, do the same thing but pass to the right, drafting a card as packs wheel around. And then finally you open pack number 3, you do the exact same thing, passing to your left again. Once you've completed that whole process, at that point you sit down and you make, at a minimum, 30-card deck and then play a couple of nice little draft games of Flesh and Blood.
Now, if you saw in that great shot that we had at the opening of the scene here, you saw that the players are sitting down. So we'll be getting to the games in probably about 5 to 10 minutes. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the schedule is going to look like today and what's coming up at our next events here at Flesh and Blood. So as you see in the broadcast today, obviously Saturday was yesterday. Today we're into Sunday. I'm correct, right?
We are into Sunday.
We're into Sunday.
Yes.
All right. Making sure I get
are.
this right. So you see that we're going to be doing rounds 11 through 13 of that said booster draft that we're doing now. These are the hardest rounds of the tournament that we've had so far. We're going to have some heartbreak. We're going to have some jubilation, because these people are going to try to make it into that single elimination top 8 booster draft that we're going to have at about noon today approximately. Yep. And that is going to be the biggest pressure draft that anyone in this country has ever done.
Yes, and it's going to be crazy too, because right now we have 32 top players, but then we're going to whittle it down to just 8. And those 8 players are going to be sitting next to each other, crafting their decks one at a time, one card at a time, having to decide, okay, I see this pack of cards. What does the person next to me think? Like, what are they taking? What are they doing? It's going to be very high pressure, because the pressure's on to win the entire event and pick up those amazing prizes.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule that's coming up, just in case you didn't make the calling this weekend. You're loving what you're seeing and you want to be involved yourself. You want to get that gold foil tunic. You want to get that PT invite. There's 2 more chances this year for you. Next week, October 22nd through 24th, there's going to be the calling in Cincinnati, and that's at the Duke Energy Convention Center. That's also Tales of Aria Sealed. So if you've been watching this week, that's what's going on. It's exactly what you've been seeing here. After that, about 2 weeks after that, that is November 5th through 7th. That's going to be the National Championships of the United States of America. That's also going to be featuring a calling in Orlando, and that's going to be the Orange County Convention Center. We hope to see you there, but if you can't make it out, make sure you come to this Twitch channel right here. We'll be covering all that action for you, so you're not going to miss a thing. And you talked about those players. You talked about that pressure. Let's take a look at some of the ones that have handled the pressure the best over this weekend and see where they are. Let's look at these standings after round 10.
We've seen Alec Myers and Caleb Van Patten on stream multiple times, and both are just incredible players, have worked their way out of dangerous situations and picked up I believe it's a 9-1 record for both players, so both of them with 9 points. Also looking down this list, we have Brendan Patrick sitting in 4th. Or the 4th seed, I should say, also at 9-1. And then Steven Wooley down there is a really great player and content creator as well, who's battled his way up to that 5 spot.
Absolutely. There's a couple more players to point out here. Close personal friend of mine, and Tariq Patel. A little more on him in a second. Matt Rogers, one of the best players in the entire world, here in 14th.
And I just want to point out, right below him is William, or Bill Yowell. He is a shop owner, and he's the owner of the shop that I play at. He literally is the owner of the shop that I play at. And right below him is a friend of mine that I play with as well. That's Cynic. At 16 as well.
And so some of these guys you see here on the second page, they've still got a chance, but they've got their backs against the wall. They need to win out from here. Some of the players that we were talking about earlier, if they get that 1-0, 2-0 start, we're looking at a really good spot to just be into the top 8.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these players, like I said, they need to be making sure they win all of their games today. Now, I wanted to kind of focus on 3 players that we're going to talk about right before we get into the games today. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday. If you were watching the end of the broadcast, you may have heard me talk about this. I focused on Pod 3 yesterday, not Pod 1 or 2. They had some great players in those. Matt Rogers making his way through that. That was kind of expected. A lot of people think he's the best player in the world. We talked about Pod 3 because I nicknamed it the Pod of Death, because it had 3 players in it that I thought were some of the best players left in the tournament, and I was hoping that at least one of them made it out of it and had a chance at top 8 today. But my dream was that 2 of them made it out. Right, that one of them would 3-0, one of them would 2-1, and they would meet in the finals that way.
And those players players were?
It was Tariq Patel,
Yep.
Brendan Patrick, and Rob Seigel is going to be in the booth with us next week in Cincinnati.
Right.
So Rob, unfortunately, was the one that didn't make it out, but the dream did come true with Brendan Patrick and Tariq Patel meeting in the finals, and Brendan winning a very narrow game to 3-0. And Brendan had some very big and powerful words to say about Tariq afterwards. Tariq might be an unknown name to you at home. This is his first event, his first calling, and he's a close personal friend of mine, very good card player. Brendan said that he is the best player he's ever played in the United States.
That is, those are large words. Brendan has played a lot of players. He has played a lot of games of flesh and blood, and to say that's high praise. So that really puts a spotlight, I guess, on Tariq now at this point, doesn't it?
Buddy, I got to put some pressure on you. I'm sorry if you're watching this afterwards. I don't know what to tell you, but you and I were here a little bit early this morning, along with Red Zone Rogue, who will be joining us later. We were all walking through the tables, watching the drafts happen this morning, and we made sure to look at these three players and watch their decks.
Right.
Thankfully, Tariq and Brendan were passing to each other for the second time already this tournament.
Right, which is very interesting when you're sitting next to the player that you hold in high esteem like that, and you are passing to them and passing from them. That is a very interesting spot to be in a draft, right?
Speaking of an interesting spot, one of the most dynamic things I've ever seen in a draft actually happened because those two were sitting next to each other, and to their right was a player who got an interview yesterday, and he talked about how he only plays Briar. Like, he always forces Briar, loves Briar. So
that's
going into the draft, Tariq knew the player who was right was going to be forcing Briar, and he knows, kind of the tendencies of Brendan. So it was a very interesting sub-game, like a meta game going on within that draft. But I'll tell you this. I watched the drafts overall. I watched all three of them. None of them were hurting each other. And, there's no, under-the-table agreement here. But they all drafted very, very well from what you'd expect of the level of play of these three players. Sure. All of their decks are phenomenal, very, very good. Tariq ended up with a very good Oldhim deck. I talked to him a little bit about it. He is happy with his deck. He's like, always it could be better, right? But he's like, I'm happy with my deck. I found the right line, the right lane. This is where I want to be. The deck is good. Brendan also very happy with his deck. He's got a Lexi deck. He said that packs 1 and 3 were very, very good to him. Pack 2, not so much, but packs 1 and 3 really made up for it. And he's got a lot of playables, so his deck is really good, really flexible. I know that you watched Matt Rogers, and you talked about his deck, and he was over the moon about his deck.
Yeah, so I actually watched all of that. He was in Pod 2, and I watched the entire Pod 2 draft kind of unfold, and I watched Matt and the player he was sitting next to and the player he was oftentimes passing from and passing to. That was an incredibly fascinating draft pool to watch and pod to watch because outside of that Pack 1, as Pack 1 was concluding, it actually looked like there were, and I think I wrote this down, it looked like there were going to be 3 Guardians out of Pack 1 based on the class cards that were starting to be picked, 4 Lexis, and 1 Briar, which is crazy. If you're the Briar player and you have good pickups on that Pack 1 and then you just go without having to worry about, people taking up power cards from you, that's really powerful. And then in Pack 2, we saw players start to shift around a little bit and someone else jumped on Briar. And then in Pack 3, everything leveled out and we had basic parity with 3, 3, and 2. And Matt, the entire time it appeared, from about midway into Pack 1 when he was taking yellow, dazzling, things like that, it was all commit for Lexi. And that was very interesting. And you mentioned he said he had a lot of playables that he felt?
He said he had almost 40 playables, so he's doesn't think that he'll be fatigued in either matchups that might come down to that because that can happen sometimes against a good Oldhim deck.
Your Lexi, especially because you need arrows to fire.
Right, and so I saw his deck, his sideboard, he's got good equipment. Overall, everything that you want, featuring a deep blue, he's got a hood, things like that, so he's ready to go. And I'll tell you this, not only was he over the moon, but I asked him, I was like, overall, how do you feel about your deck? And he says, this might be the best deck I've ever drafted in this format. So if you're a fan of Matt Rogers at home, I know some of his fellow countrymen are watching this right now. He's got a very, very good chance.
That's very intriguing to see how that goes forward. It's going to be very interesting to see as these next rounds play out. And it does look like, I think we have round 11, which is the first round for today, ready to go. And would you believe it? It's an Oldham mirror. We have an Oldham mirror to kick us off in round 11. We have Tariq, your buddy, and Steven playing together.
Yeah, Tariq, a player originally from Canada, so he's from the Great White North. He's living in Florida now. He's a doctor in the Orlando area, so he will be playing in the calling or the national championship in Orlando as a hometown guy. He's going to be able to sleep in his own bed.
Yeah.
Eat his own home cooking. It's a little bit of an advantage, I think, for some players.
And look at this. We have, starting off with a Titan's Fist pitching a blue Evergreen, which is a great card to put to the bottom of your deck for late game. We talked about it yesterday. But at the top, we have a Winter's Whale. A Winter's Whale is such a good pickup. And look at this, no equipment either.
I was just about to say that. When you look at this, there's a stark difference here. Like, we see a Titan's Fist versus a Winter's Whale, right? And this is the one one weapon that if I get, I'm willing to play over the base weapons.
Yeah,
it's
strictly better.
It's just strictly
better weapon.
Right? But then when you look at Tariq's side, he's got a runaway, he's got a deep blue, he's got a plume, and we see none of that with Steven. And I will say that about the drafts. In these drafts, especially these higher end ones with some of the higher end players, some of the better players, if you want equipment, you better pick it high.
Yeah, you pick it early in your pack if you find it. And we do see Rotten Old Buckler as well, which is a fantastic and perhaps undervalued piece of equipment if you're playing Oldham and playing Guardian in Sealed or in Limited in general, because it can block breakpoints really well. Block with a 3, and then add the Rotten Old Buckler, and you avoid a 7 attack with an on-hit.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was actually one of his hardest picks of the draft, it looked like, because he opened a pack, and it was very early. I think it was like pack 2, pick 2. And there's I don't remember the exact card, but there's a very, very good card for Oldham.
Oh, my goodness.
Boy.
Hold on. We have on this turn, straight up, just a red Glacial Footsteps pitched and fused. So this is 10 with Dominate. This is a 10 attack with Dominate. I think this is literally his turn 1.
Yeah, and you got to believe maybe the Buckler even comes out already just to make sure it soaks up enough damage here.
I think maybe you just take it. Maybe you throw a 3-block card down and just take 7.
Oh, we've got a defensive reaction, though.
Oh, no, look, he's going to play a Summerwood Shelter. So blocking 5 of this is just a fantastic time to have a Summerwood Shelter, I guess.
And I did see Tariq, when he was drafting, kind of take a few of these, I think, relatively high from something that maybe, I underrate the card a little bit, but I think he knows that you need to be defensive as much as you possibly can in this format to make sure that you're not going to die. And then we got a big attack on the way back from Tariq here.
Yeah, this is an Entwined Earth, and it's a red Entwined Earth, so it attacks normally for 6, but because you're fusing here, this is attacking for 8. He was able to block 4 of that last attack because he played the Mulch down as a block and then the buff on the Summerwood, so he is at 16, but he's returning volley, basically, in a very real and threatening way.
Absolutely, and I like seeing this from the Oldhim mirror, we're getting the big attacks in early, so maybe the game speeds up a little bit. We're not going to go to fatigue on both decks, kind of like the mirror that we saw yesterday that came down to the absolute last cards in both decks. And you see some players, with that in mind. You saw Tariq with the Evergreen. He took that very, very high lead in his draft. I think he might have first picked it in pack 2, if I remember right. And that idea is already there. I need this kind of recursive threat.
And it's also interesting from Steven's perspective because of that Winter's Whale. And this is in draft where I didn't catch when he picked this card up, or if it was pack 1, pack 2, pack 3. If you find this kind of card, a Winter's Whale pack 1 or even pack 2, you can immediately start just picking up a ton of blue ice cards or ice cards in general, so that you can, in a pinch like this where you maybe block with 2 cards and have a 2-card hand, maybe you're just content to Arsenal and Winter's Whale on turns that are tough.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a little peek into his hand. I do see some ice cards, but I also see a couple earth cards here, as you see with him blocking with one of each here. That's a Snow Under, too. That's a big, powerful card to be blocking with.
Oh, so he's going to actually block with 2 cards and then trigger the defense reaction on Oldham, which is the prevent 2 damage. So he blocked everything in this scenario. No, it looks like he laked 1 point. Excuse me.
So it looks like Steven's going to go down to 19. Tariq's at 16.
Oh, and exactly what we talked about, pitching a Majestic Blizzard to just come across for 4 if it hits, create that Frostbite token and slow you down just a little bit more, which is tough if you're playing Oldham sometimes.
Yeah, and these attacks, if there's ever a turn that Tariq really needs to make sure that Frostbite doesn't stop him, if he's looking at his hand, he's like, I really need to not make it. Is this one of the ones where, you might consider blocking with 1 card plus the Buckler from your hand just to ensure there's no Frostbite?
Either you ensure that there's no Frostbite, or you ensure that you have the resources in hand, that you're not using those to defend with, so that you can play out a big attack. Oftentimes you'll see, like an Oldham player set up a setup turn where they do keep some number of cards in hand so that they can, for example, we saw it earlier, play the Glacial Footsteps, pitch 2 blues, and fuse it. And it's in those moments where a Rotten Old Buckler block and a 1-card block makes a lot easier.
Yeah, so I got to believe there's going to be a little more ice on the side of Steven. We see that Tariq is a little bit more of the earth version of Oldham, at least so far.
So far, yeah.
What we've seen. Now, I do see over here in his discard pile, I see a Mulch. And I know that he had, if I remember right, I remember him taking this Mulch. I'm trying to remember if he had more and how he's playing, because that's a card that could be big in this matchup, because there's going to be arsenals on probably both sides of the board for quite a while here, and Mulch is a card that acts, if you're a classic constructed player, it's a lot like Command and Conquer if you can fuse it.
It can target that arsenal slot. If your opponent is using it constantly, you can target that arsenal slot very well, and that does pose some danger. Mulch is an interesting card in that it does cost 4, so oftentimes you are pitching 2 cards just to play the Mulch, and so then it acts like Glacial Footsteps in a way, because Glacial Footsteps you pitch 6 for, and Mulch you pitch 4 for, but you have to have 2 cards generally to pitch unless you've set up and reduced the cost. He's going to double block here and avoid the Frostbite.
Yep,
That's a good call, I guess.
It looks like Steven, that's going to be it for his turn. He's going to go ahead and drop the 4. He's still got that Arsenal card. We're going to go back over to Tariq with, I believe, 2 cards in his hand and an Arsenal card here. Looks like a pitch of a Surge, and an Icy Encounter is going to be attacked. Now, this is a card that, these are one of my favorite generic cards in the set, just the good ones that, A, they can be revealed for fusion. They have a high attack power here. You see this is a 6 attack power already, and it has a good on-hit, making a Frostbite token.
It has a great on-hit. This is one of those where you're basically saying, okay, pick 2 cards from your hand and block with those because you don't generally want a Frostbite. The only way you'd be okay, or not the only way, I shouldn't say that, but the one way that you might be okay with taking this Frostbite is if you have a, like a 2-cost attack action card and a blue in hand. Because if you do that, then you don't care about the Frostbite. You've already got the extra resource you're going to float anyway. So you can say, well, I'll block with, like 1 card, take some damage, make a Frostbite, and then just pay for the Frostbite.
Absolutely. All right, speaking of blocking, let's see what Steven's got here. He's going to check his Arsenal card out here, and is this one of the harder matchups to block in because there's so much strain on your resources?
I don't know if it's necessarily harder than some matchups as far as blocking is concerned, because I feel like the other 2 heroes really make you want to block their attacks, whereas this one generally just comes across for like pure damage. Like if you're playing against Lexi, they push breakpoints, and they're like, hey, if this hits, you're going to take 3 extra, and then Briar's like, hey, if this hits, I make embodiment of Earth tokens, and I can defend against your next attacks very well. Here in Oldham, it's like, hey, if this hits, I just hit you for a lot.
Just take a lot,
and we actually see that this is just hitting, and, it's just going to create a Frostbite. I do want to point out, he pitched a yellow Earthlore to pay for this. That's at the bottom of his deck, and in this matchup, which can be grindier, which can be longer, you can see the bottom of your deck. You can have that thing hit that second cycle. So we now know there's a yellow Earthlore Surge on the bottom of the deck on Tariq's side. So if he chooses to, he can set that up for late game and play something very large. Comes in with the yellow Icequake, which is going to give a buff and also give an on-hit effect, which is fantastic. Yellow Icequakes are really, really good. This is one of those cards that you want to snatch up in a draft because it just provides some serious, serious power.
It's super annoying, too, to play against this card all the time, and I find that I definitely undervalued these cards at first.
Yeah, the on-hit effect is, for any attack, giving it to any attack is fantastic because it pushes that possible taxation. In this matchup, less so, because like I said, you just pitch blue for just about everything you do, but if your opponent has a 3-cost they want to play, now they have to pitch 2 cards from their hand. Look at this. This is great, too. Icequake can apply to Winter's Wail. I love this combo, and it's one of those combos that you just want to do, and it does look like he pitched blue for this. So Winter's Wail is coming across for 6. If it hits, it creates 2 Frostbite tokens.
Yeah, this is definitely a spot where Tariq's going to be kind of hard-pressed to make a good block here because I think you can kind of shrug off 1 Frostbite sometimes with some of your hands. 2, it starts to get really, really difficult.
He does the exact right thing. He's like, okay, you're gonna put this pressure on. I'm just going to block 2 and probably play a 2-card hand.
Yeah, one of his Strength of Sequoias is getting taken away here. A card that can be very important in this kind of matchup and in this deck because Strength of Sequoia is a aura that sits around and kind of buffs up your attacks. And so if you have something like Thump, if you want to pump that Thump.
Pump the Thump right there.
Yep.
Instead, he's just going to throw down the Glacial Footsteps and attack with Titan's Fist for 4.
Instead, he's pumping the Fist.
Yeah, he is. It's fist pumping. Oh, yeah, that'll be a thing. Fist pumping. We'll do that. It's interesting in this matchup, too, because when one of these 2 players has access to a Winter's Wail, they can do what Steven did on his last turn. He pitched 3 of his cards to attack with Winter's Wail. His deck is now set up for late game, and it's also less apt to fatigue. Whereas when you don't have this and you're just throwing down attack after attack, you're more likely to fatigue your deck. So he can pivot at any point from aggression to just a pure fatigue strategy, as long as he plays fast enough and doesn't hit a timer.
And that's actually a really good point because we're seeing Tariq attack and block a little bit more, so he's probably gone through a few more of his cards. I do want to point out that the Plume of Evergrowth could be an important card in that kind of game, right? When we get to really low. Yep.
Yeah, it can. It can go and fetch you an attack that you really need, or it could fetch you, depending on if they have the double evergreen thing where you want to try to set up that cycle. And there's the Thump. Comes across with a 6 Thump. No buff on this one, so it's interesting. He used the Icequake last turn to push Winter's Wail. And Icequake is one of those cards that you combine with Thump so that you can push the Dominate effect and push the on-hit discard.
Now, when you see someone make that kind of sequencing, like it's probably pretty obvious that the Thump was not in their hand. They probably would have saved this for the Thump next turn with Icequake. But when you see that kind of thing happen, does that make you kind of think either they might not have a much more copies of Thump, or they might not have enough pumps for this, so they're not like valuing this super highly, making this try to be pumped?
Well, I believe that Thump came from Arsenal, so it's as if he chose to get it out of the Arsenal and just play it for pure value, so that perhaps he can Arsenal whatever card he has now. Maybe that's a setup card that he wants to play some very big turn. Speaking of setups, Strength of Sequoia, I don't think he fused.
No, it doesn't look like a fusion.
Yeah, no, it does not fuse. So if you fuse a Strength of Sequoia, you earn yourself a Seismic Surge token, which is a fantastic way of making a 4-cost attack, a 3-cost attack. Instead of fusing here, this is just going to provide a +3 buff on his next attack next turn. And he comes across with Titan's Fist for 4, which is, right away blocked.
Yeah, it's going to be double block, so Tariq's going to stay at 15. We've got Steven up at 13, and this is going to be the start of Steven's turn here after Tariq.
Ooh, a spicy Winter's Bite play, saying you're going to either pitch a resource or you're going to discard a card, which is really fun. This is one of my favorite cards in Limited. I really enjoy the force. You're forcing a card out of their hand, which gives you a little bit of tempo. It prevents them from setting up as much. It's really good against Oldham as well, because he needs more cards than he needs less. And here we have the pitch of the blue Frostfang to push 4 attack and a Frostbite. So this is making the next turn a little bit more awkward for Tariq. Yeah, so target hero discards a card unless they pay 1 resource. And he did pay the resource by pitching the yellow Entangle floating, but you don't use that floating resource ever.
Now, in this matchup, you pretty much always want to be pitching the card here, right? Just so it goes to the bottom of your deck instead of to your discard pile.
Yeah, you always do. And he can kind of use the resource if he pitches, like an Earth or an Ice card as a defense reaction. So he can make use of the floating. In this scenario, it might be worth it. And look, he wants to avoid the Frostbite token and use the nice little break point of the safety valve, I should say, avoiding the break point of 4 by just blocking with that Rotten Old Buckler and the Strength of Sequoia blue. I think Steven did a really good job of pressuring Tariq's hand here. It depends on how much he can actually play from hand, what kind of large attack he can play. He still has a 2-card hand and an arsenal. And he's probably just going to play something that's, nice and strong. That's pushing 10.
Yeah, and Autumn's Touch here with the buff from Strength of Sequoia. Yep. And, you and I have talked about this before, and I think it's good to point out, and you said so there, that the turns before, when people start setting up something with Strength of Sequoia and leaving it in play, you want to try to pressure their hand as much as possible to make their next turn as bad as possible into that turn with that buff coming up.
Because if he did not pressure his hand here, then he could have instead pitched the Strength of Sequoia. Wow, well blocked.
Whoa.
Incredibly well blocked and forcing more cards from hand, but I don't think he actually has a card in hand. Oh, yes, he does. He had one more. It was a Glacial. He was probably thinking about arsenaling the blue Glacial. A really good block. And look, he kept 1 card in hand. It's probably a blue Ice card, so that it's a pitch for the Winter's Wail. It was, because he revealed the Ice card.
What a huge turn for Steven.
That was a swing of a swing. If he hadn't made the prior play I was mentioning earlier, then you could have seen like a Chill to the Bone blue come out, which would combine with the 10 power Autumn's Touch to say, hey, if this hits at all, you're also getting a Frostbite. So a very good sequence back and forth on both defending and attacking for Steven. And even though he's sitting at 12, he's really trying to pressure and protect his own life total so that he can play more of the long game. He's more content playing the long game.
I think both these guys are, but it does seem like Steven's getting a little better set up for that in these games. Having the Winter's Wail, I think we can not overstate enough how good and important this is.
Yeah. I think it's one of those scenarios where in this moment when you look at this mirror match, you have to decide who's the aggressor and who's playing control. Choosing to block with the So Tomorrow and put the Earth Lore at the bottom, which he pitched to use Oldham's defense reaction ability, blocking all of it. So life totals stay the same. Going to pitch the mulch because the mulch does have enough power to, or it does have the cost, I should say, to trigger the Titan's Fist ability and make this come for 4.
Yeah, this is something we talked about too. This is a card to kind of watch out for, even though Tariq hasn't really been able to get, enough of a turn to have 4 resources to attack with a mulch. But this is a card that could be important at times to force a lot of action out of Steven if he does have an arsenal sitting there. Mulch is one of these cards that if you do Earth Fuse with it when it attacks, it acts as a command and conquer.
Yeah.
So.
Mulch is a little sticky because it costs 4.
It's
the 4 cost attacks that are a little sticky and limited because just having the resources to actually pitch to play those cards can be tricky. It's going to block 3 here. No, sorry, 2 here and take... is he taking 1? No, I think maybe he pitched to use the Oldham effect.
I think so too. It looks like Steven is still at 12. It looks like he's going to draw for his turn.
Force the draw up. Just pass. Passing back over. And now we see Tariq just coming across with the Titan's Fist again. It's interesting because I do believe that he has a full grip, and instead of actually playing out a large attack, he's just going to say, I'll just attack you again with the Titan's Fist.
Now, when you're doing this kind of thing, is it because Titan's Fist is enough of a threat to kind of force something out of Steven's hand, plus like this gives Tariq the chance to either follow this up with something or set up for a bigger turn next time?
Right, this doesn't have go again, so in doing this play, you're basically saying that I'm trying to get as much value out of every card that I have and as much pressure out of every card that I have because I need to make up the disparity in our deck sizes, and I need to make up the disparity in you have a Winter's Wail, which is just strictly better than my weapon. So I need any possible edge in the long game that I can, because if you have the ability to make those giant blocks like you did a moment ago, I'm going to run out of threats.
It does look like Tariq arsenal a card here. Arsenals for both players here, it seems. Steven working with an arsenal and a few card hand.
Yeah. And so Titan's Fist attack on that last turn means, okay, I'm going to attack you for 4, maybe rip a card or 2, make your turn a little bit more comfortable or uncomfortable, and then I'm going to arsenal and set up for my own big turn because I need to maximize my threats.
I think you're seeing 2 players here that really understand the ways of Oldham go at each other in this kind of matchup.
This is a really, really good game to watch if you want to understand how you can play the mirror, if you want to understand how Guardian in general can play controlling or can play tempo. This is a fantastic way and game to watch and learn.
All right, Tariq considering his blocks here, this Winter's Wail just kind of wailing away at him. I couldn't think of a way to not use the pun there.
Sure, yeah, of course. It's weird because it's like, okay, every time you attack with Winter's Wail, I have to block with a card and pitch a card to pitch an Earth card to stop the last leftover damage, and that's basically meaning that you're double blocking, but you're still cycling one of your cards. In your
and that's actually preferable in this, right? Instead of blocking with 2 cards and losing both of them to your discard pile.
Oh yeah,
you're getting kind of half of it back.
In a fatigue matchup, certainly. He's going to pop the deep blue, which means he's going to cycle a card, and he's going to gain 3 resources, turning whatever that card was into a blue pitch, and pitching it for Autumn's Touch for another 7 damage. These Autumn's Touches might be the thing he goes and fetches with Plume of Evergrowth later in the game, depending on, again, what the rest of his composition is looking like and how many of those threats he drafted have been burned through already.
Absolutely. And you can see Tariq really, really considering the long game as early as, I think it was turn 2 or 3 is the first time I saw him, pick up his opponent's graveyard here and kind of look through his discard pile to see what's gone through, how many blues are missing, how many big plays, how many defensive reactions. Yeah, double block out of Steven.
It's the exact thing you need to do, and I really respect both players for keeping their life totals high because they understand that at any moment they could see some sort of crazy dominated Glacial Steps or dominated Thump or something like that that they just can't deal with. And there's it is. Is that another Blizzard? Did he cycle his deck already, or does he just have 2 majestic Blizzards?
Yeah.
2 majestic Blizzards in his deck, which doesn't have play in this matchup necessarily because it stops go again, but you can pitch it to attack with Winter's Wail for 4 and a Frostbite.
It does look like Streets of Sequoia is going to block with an Evergreen going to the bottom of Tariq's deck. And you know what? I've also got to appreciate, you're talking about, you do appreciate these players, the speed at which they're playing this matchup, because that is very important too.
Oh my goodness, yeah, they have to play quickly because the time ticks away, and in a longer game matchup like this, you're not ending in 10 minutes. It's not like a 3-turn, I throw giant thing, you throw giant thing, and then I deal arcane damage or something like that.
It's not the Briar matchup that we got used to yesterday.
It's not Briar versus Briar. It's a different mirror match monster altogether. And the pitch, is he fusing it? No, he's just playing it for the pitch to block 3. Oh, he is fusing it. So this does say, okay, you're not going to get to keep that card in your hand if you wanted to. You're going to pitch it away.
See an Amulet of Ice going to the bottom of Tariq's deck, too. Really good card for pitching in this matchup.
So he's cycling his deck now. I think we're probably to that point where the deck has started to cycle on Tariq's side. So the yellow Earthlore Surge we saw earlier might be lining up very soon. If you can jam down an Earthlore Surge plus a large attack, things get very good for you.
Also, the Arsenals have kind of been sitting there for a while for some of these players, especially for Tariq. So, like, maybe he's got that in mind. He knows he's coming towards the bottom of his deck. He knows that's coming up, and he's setting for a big turn. Now, there is a blue Glacial Footsteps that's going to be going to the bottom of his deck again, so that might be coming back around sometime really soon.
Here comes the it was an Earthlore Surge, and it did cycle. That was the Earthlore from earlier.
This is going to be a big attack.
And blue Evergreen, that is not coming from Arsenal, so basically just going to cycle that out of the deck at this point. But that Earthlore Surge is pushing, I believe that pushes +4, and the Evergreen attacks for 5, so this is a 9 total attack.
Yeah, and this is the big attacks that you want in these spots, right? Kind of force the hand of Steven here.
Yeah. It's also interesting, you mentioned it a moment ago, Steven has held that card in Arsenal for multiple turns. He is going to bleed off some life here, blocking 6 out of the 9.
Yeah, I feel like we hadn't had damage happen in a while. It looks like we finally did.
Yeah, a couple of little cuts for Steven, taking a couple
Here we go.
It's a Weave Ice, and the Weave Ice allows him to set it up. If he's going to fuse it, it gains Dominate. This is that kind of play that you want to make. If you have a large-scale attack. Oh, he's just going to say, no, never mind. We'll hold off.
I actually think Tariq's deck is bigger than Steven's at this point, it looked like.
Do you think so?
After seeing them counted, I think Tariq has actually turned the corner on that.
Well, don't forget, if you have the fatigue matchup where I'm just going to do Winter's Wail, you can more or less play infinitely in that respect at a better rate than your opponent, because they're pitching a blue for Titan's Fist for 4, but you're pitching a blue for Titan's Fist, or sorry, for Winter's Wail, and it's a Frostbite trigger as well.
Yeah, if it comes down to that, it's going to be interesting to see if what happens to that Winter's Wail for that spot, and the Evergreen, if there's another one in Tariq's deck that could be cycled from Arsenal, every other turn pretty much.
So he does take the Frostbite here. He takes the damage, pitching another Glacial Footsteps coming across here. He has to pay multiple resources, multiple cards, I should say, of resources, so that he can attack with that Titan's Fist. But he's doing as much as he can to really push that deck to its limit. Yeah, it's looking very small. That deck down there is definitely looking very small. Going to block 2 here and take 2. Down to 4, I think. That's a really interesting block.
And
dropping down to 4. And we do see he's pitched multiple Glacial Footsteps back-to-back. And so Tariq's deck is rapidly approaching that moment where you go Glacial by pitching a couple of blues. And when you do that, even if it's a blue Glacial, it's coming for 8, and that could close the game.
There was another one as well, I think a turn or two before this. I think there's 3 still floating around in his deck.
He's cycling them and stacking them. And the lower the deck gets, the more concentrated those get together so that you can pitch play.
It looks like 6 cards, I think.
They're both very low.
And I think this is about 10-ish cards for Tariq.
10.
It looked about 10, yeah. I was trying to count his hand down to the bottom left.
Yeah, it looked like 6 and 10 apiece.
I'm just eyeballing this one, but that looks like a 10-card deck to me.
Yeah, and perhaps it's one of those scenarios where Steven ran just a strictly like 32-card deck or something like that, where Tariq built extra cards into it so he doesn't have the likelihood of fatiguing. He's going to take the oh no, he pitched, I think, to stop that extra damage.
The typical play we've been seeing, the block pitch, yeah.
Yep.
And it looks like, here we go. There's another one. There's the
Titan Fist for 4.
There's the blue Titan's Fist.
Pitching that blue Glacial to attack for 4. It's at this moment where you can play this 4 against 4 matchup, and someone's going to slowly bleed down. The issue for Steven is that he is at a much less life. He's going to do the same play, pitch the Earthlore Surge. He needs to set up a large swing turn and start to steal some cards, because if he doesn't, he's going to, even with just the pitch for the attack for Winter's Wail, he just doesn't have the cards in deck to block.
Absolutely, and again, I got to say this because we were talking about this. It's coming up again. Both these players at Arsenal, it's been sitting there for a while, so I think both of them may be trying to set up that one big turn to really push through. And if you're Steven, you got to be a little worried because you're at 6 while Tariq's at 12.
Exactly.
So you're talking one big Glacial Footsteps, even if it's Dominator or not.
Yeah,
can be huge here.
And we do know that the Arsenal up in Steven's side is that yellow Weave Ice, and so if he has any cards he can string together left, then this would be the moment where you would want to just take something, perhaps, and then just jam down a big turn. Wow, he's going to block with the Glacial Footsteps. Really?
That's really, really... you got to feel like a win, kind of, from Tariq's side.
Yeah, well, I think that may just be one of those scenarios where it's like, I'm literally just down to, I can only block 2s with the rest of my hand. And your Glacial, at this point, that yellow Glacial coming for 9,
Oh,
even
speaking
and there
of,
it is. Even if you don't dominate it, this is one of your last threats in the deck.
this is a defensive reaction. It looks like in Tariq's
Is
arsenal.
is that a turn timber?
I think
It's
that was a
possible.
turn timber. Yeah.
Possible a turn timber, and if so, then he can kind of shut this out.
This is what he's been waiting for, right?
Yeah, he needs to do something about this life disparity. It is a red turn timber. Pitching, no fuse, but you don't necessarily need it. He needed damage to go through there so that he could push that life total down.
Absolutely, and I think you can kind of see it. Steven's reaction when he saw that come from the arsenal, he kind of gave him the nod. Like,
yeah,
that's one of those nods. Like, yeah, I was kind of hoping that's not what it was.
Game over.
That's probably not good for me.
He's a 5-card deck, 4 cards in hand, 1 card in deck, 1 card in arsenal. And Tariq has managed to either through just putting more cards in his deck early, like before the game started, or by straight up just maximizing value out of Titan's Fist with all those large attacks that he's cycling around and around and around. He has managed to whittle the deck down to next to nothing at this point.
And I think I saw an Evergreen still in Tariq's deck. We know there's Glacial Footsteps, so
yeah,
you might have the power left over to finish this off.
Oh, most definitely. If he can continue to pressure each turn with that Titan's Fist, you can just Titan's Fist a card out of your hand every turn until you don't have any more cards.
Speaking of not having any more cards, Steven is now what we like to call hellbent.
Yeah.
He has no cards left in his deck.
He is down to the last 4 cards in his hand, I believe, and it's going to be Titan's Fist. You've got to take at this point because your cards have to do something for you, but it is very dire straits trying to block out a 4-attack hammer.
I think you can kind of tell in the body language here. You can see Tariq is kind of feeling it. He's feeling like this is his time to win. He's kind of molded this game state to this point. He's kind of moved it here, and it's been kind of impressive to see with the Winter's Wail not having the effect in this game and how well he's played around that card turn after turn after turn. And I think he actually was behind in deck size for a while as well early in the game.
Yeah, it definitely could be that scenario. He even has outs like, because he has the tempo in this scenario, less cards, less life for your opponent, he could even set up that kind of constant 5-attack with the double Evergreen play that we kind of saw get set up yesterday if he wanted to.
Absolutely. I think Tariq's mapped out exactly how he wants this game with the way that he's pitched. He's got the 3 pitches left in his deck. Yep. He's got a few Earth cards left to kind of be able to use Oldham's ability here, and he's running Steven out of cards. Steven has to block all of this every time because if he takes any spill damage, one of the big attacks just kills him immediately.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. It's at this point where it's like almost a foregone conclusion outside of something absolutely incredible here, because every turn requires a 1-card block or a pitch like that and take some damage. But you can only do that twice before you're just dead.
And so Steven took 2 here, down to 3. So Tariq, you've got to believe, is sizing it up here. Maybe a bit. Oh, okay. Well, here's one of the big plays that we did talk about.
Weave Ice, all he had left was a Frost Fang, so he jams down the Weave Ice, giving +2. You can't fuse this, so it doesn't gain Dominate. Frost Fang comes in and pushes some threat, but this is basically just like I take it, I'm happy with that. Maybe I'll pitch away for the effect on Frost Fang, but really you don't have much to worry about there, because at that point, playing those 2 cards, your opponent, you now have an exact read on what they have. In fact, you've had that for a little while, perhaps. So you just basically pitch and try to jam down 2 more attacks, and your opponent's going to drop to 0. Winter's Wail comes across for 4, threatening that Frostbite. At this point, it's a moot point. You can actually just take and then overpay for your next attack and finish it most likely.
Yeah, Steven down to 1 here. Tariq still sitting at a very, very healthy 12. Probably considering, do I even need to block here? It doesn't look like he's going to at all. He's going to use his entire hand because he's got this wrapped up.
Yeah, there's only 2 cards left in circulation over there, and both I think are blizzards. So you just jam down the glacial and you finish the job.
And this is what we'll be talking about the whole time. There's a glacial footstep sitting there. We've been waiting for this the entire game. This glacial footsteps fused, dominated, huge attack, and that's going to take Tariq Patel up to 9-2. Steven Wooley's going to fall down to 8-3. And I was talking to Tariq. I was talking to him before the start of the day, and he thinks that if he wins his first 2 rounds today, that's practically locking him for top 8, no matter what happens in the last round.
By the numbers, that makes a lot of sense. By the numbers, if you can close those 2 out, then you have put yourself in a very good position to go into that top 8 and really play for something very special.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Tariq's put himself into that position to play for something very special, so he's got to be happy and ecstatic about winning this round. Steven's got his back against the wall. Maybe he can win out and hope for the best. Maybe even put up a really, really good finish as well. Nothing wrong with the top 16 at this tournament.
Both players played incredibly well during
absolutely.
that game and knew what they were doing. It just turned out in favor of Tariq.
Absolutely. So we're going to have another match for you in about 3 minutes, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Flesh and Blood.